The diversity of perspective and diversity of background and upbringing and culture to me has always been like a huge asset. I've always preached that on the podcast with my team, like with the people that I hire.
Mhm.
I'm always looking for like, okay, who can bring kind of a new flavor to this? Because the last thing that we want to be is all just like carbon copies of each other.
Kiss my aesthetic, branding, marketing, entrepreneurship.
Greetings and welcome back to the Kiss My Aesthetic podcast. I'm so excited to have Palu on the podcast today. Welcome, Palu.
Thank you. Hello. I'm so excited to be here.
And it's your very first podcast, which is so exciting. This is one of your goals for this year, which we're going to get into. But we actually figured out that it was one of your goals because you're in the BINGOALS accountability group. So
Yeah.
tell everyone how you like learned about that, what interested you in it, like how you ended up here, basically.
Yeah. So actually, the whole story is like I've been following you for a while. As you know, I saw you long time ago doing a workshop in Bali. We're probably going to get to that later. And then I've been following you and I
Mhm.
always admired your way of working, like design and also marketing. And as soon as, first I started doing the bingos by myself. And I remember I was in Vietnam and I woke up one morning and I saw that you opened this opportunity to join the group. And I was like, I have to join. And I remember I got this like very emotional and excited note. I was like, I really want to be part of this. And then, yeah, that's how it happened. I was so happy to see that I was selected to be part of the group.
Yeah, it's been a really fun experiment. This is the first time I've hosted anything like this before, as I tell you guys every time that we meet. But what's been the value you've gotten so far? How has it been working for you? By the time we're recording, it's already first week of September.
Yeah.
But do you feel like having this group to check in with is helping you reach your goals? Like, are you a big goal setter person before this?
Yeah, I've always set goals for like the month or the year, especially, at the beginning of the year, you have all the things that you want to achieve. But I think having the group was a push to that, like knowing every month you're going to have that goal and you kind of have to review it by yourself and also like explain the things that you've been working on. And you want to see that progress, right? You want to show that like you're doing the stuff. And for me, that's been very important. And the push of knowing, okay, by this time I do want to make progress and also kind of doing some reverse engineering. Okay, if next month I want to achieve one of these goals, what do I have to do at the beginning of the month so that I can get there? And aside from that, a big thing I got from the group is connecting with the other people in the group, even outside the group. I've had calls where we, catch up and like try to stay connected. And also that was one of my goals in my bingo card. It was like, I want to make meaningful connections. So I was like, I need to make the best out of this because the
Yeah.
people in the group were perfect for that.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see how everyone is getting something different out of the group as well. So we have like a monthly check-in call and then we have a one-on-one call. And on your one-on-one call, I feel like we got so much accomplished.
Yeah,
What were
we
your
did.
takeaways from that session? And how did it help to just kind of have my eyes and ears on your bingo sheet? What did it bring up for you or what light bulb moments did you have on that?
So funny enough, that call for me was also a big accountability thing. I kept pushing it. I was like, by the time I talk to Michelle, I want to, have the right questions and I really want to know what to ask and make the best out of it. Because I was like, having your brain, because I've listened so much of your podcast and I know your way of thinking with marketing and design. I was like, I have so many questions and I need to organize my brain on the things that I want you to help me with. And I had a lot of questions and I feel like you guided me through the things that I wanted to solve. I think the biggest takeaway for me was regarding like pricing. You gave me a perspective that I never really thought
Yeah.
about when like breaking down the pricing, the team, the value of my time, the value of the team's time. And that was very helpful for a lot of proposals that I sent since then.
Yeah, yeah. Let's get into it. Let's tell people what it is that you actually offer and get to know your business a little bit more. Because I'd love to talk about that more specifically, but let's kind of lay the groundwork first and let people know what it is that you do.
Perfect. Yeah. So I'm the founder and creative director at my design agency. We do packaging design. So we work with brands in the CPG industry, especially for brands that have a rich cultural background. So a lot of these are, drinks, beverage, food, and a lot of that comes from my background in traveling. And now I'm translating that into helping brands, craft their narrative, like find what makes them unique and be able to express that through packaging.
Did you always want to be a packaging designer, or what's been your experience up until this point that led you to packaging?
I think for me, I started with design. From the moment I knew I wanted to be a designer, I did a little bit of everything. Also because I learned all of it by myself. So, I started with with like branding. And then I was like, at the beginning, it was a little bit harder, of course, to get clients. So I was like, I'm going to take whatever comes my way. So that allowed me to experiment in so many areas, from like UI, UX, web design, packaging design. And there was something about packaging design that always attracted me. That is the idea of bringing design outside of the screen into reality, into like people's hands. And for me, that was always like a thread. I was like, every project that I did for packaging, it felt like, oh my God, I want to see this in the supermarket. I want to get it in my hands, and like actually people bringing it home with them was a big, big reason why I wanted to do packaging. And it was such a beautiful moment when I was like, from now on, I only do packaging design, and I love it.
I remember having that conversation with you, right? Because we were talking about everything that it is that you offered, and so many of your goals were towards, I want to be just known as a packaging designer. And correct me if I'm wrong, but your first kind of response to me was like, is that enough? Like, can I just be a packaging designer? Like, should we offer more things? What else do we offer? And do you remember what that conversation was like?
Yeah, I think that's kind of the question you always have, right? From like the top, and then the more niche you
Yeah.
get, it's like, is that enough? And then I remember our conversation, and you were like, you cannot spread yourself too thin. Like, if you wanted,
Mhm.
because you asked me, like, do you want to be known as like the person for packaging? I'm like, yes. You're like, so then don't do other stuff, because people will know you for other things.
Mhm.
And yeah, after our conversation, I kind of reframed the way I do my services, because I had a little bit of like, maybe more like, okay, if I don't offer branding, who's doing the branding, and how do we work around that? And after our
Mhm.
conversation, I got very deep into researching how do other agencies do it? How do people frame it? And like, the reality is like, everybody, there's no answer for it. Everybody does it a different way. So I started like emailing
Exactly.
other agencies, asking as a
Exactly.
client, like, hey, how would you do this project for me? And now I landed in a solution, and I'm very happy with it.
Good, good, good. It's tricky, right? Because it's with business, and as like your skill set grows, but also like there's this kind of like ebb and flow of feeling like when you just start, you have to offer everything to everyone. And then you're like, okay, maybe I'm not going to offer it to everyone. I'm just going to offer it to like this small niche. And then I'm going to offer everything to everyone in this niche, when really like you could serve them better and you could be happier if you focused on the thing that you were the best at, because then you get specialized knowledge, right? So the more amount of time you spend in packaging is the more knowledge that you have, is the better you can serve the next client. And we talked about this last time. It's like really getting into you can bring experience to the table in the meeting with the client in 5 years from now based on the things that you're learning now, because the more time you spend in that world, right? It's like, okay, are we doing an emboss? Are we doing a blind emboss? Is this going to have a spot gloss? Is this raised? Is this a cutout? Is it not? Is it,
Mm-hmm.
what are the die lines? Like you start speaking that whole language, where that adds up, right? That accumulates over time, and then you create better value, I think. What are some of the packaging projects that you've worked on that you've been most excited about?
Yeah, I think just briefly going into that, the more niche you get, also you realize there's so
Hmm.
much to learn. There's like not niche at all, it's
There's
like
so much.
there is
Totally.
so much like
Totally.
materials and labels and bottles and all these things. I think for me, the projects that because now I'm focusing on like brands that have a cultural background, every brand that is like drinks mostly in like liquors, or even now,
Mhm.
there's a big trend for like non-alcoholic drinks, but a lot of them have a background in like, Italian or many different cultures. We worked on a gin for a South African brand actually, and that was very exciting
Cool.
for me. Wine also. I'm Argentinian, and Argentina has a massive wine culture. Actually, one of the girls in my team, she lives in Mendoza, which is like the capital of wine in Argentina. So those projects are very exciting for me, because you get to pull from, a lot of different things. It's not only about the product, but it's like, the story of the founders, the
Right.
story of like the
Right.
sourcing materials, and all these things that make a project very rich.
Yes, totally agree. And I want to get to that next, is kind of the cultural impact of story building and world building. Because so much of branding, I think a lot of good branding has that really close connection to like the core origin story, like you were just talking
Mhm.
about, right? Like the founder story, the history, the tradition. What or how do you describe like culturally informed branding, like you're talking about? Like if you could summarize it in a few short sentences, which is hard to do, how do you bring those elements of culture into design?
So I think starting with like the definition of culture, it's, a lot of people think
Mm-hmm.
culture is like related to a country only or to a religion. But I think culture is like, it's the essence of people. It's like shared traditions, shared
Mm-hmm.
values, and shared stories. And I think for products, especially in the CPG industry, they can come from different sources. And like I said, that could be founder story, like the founders, so many founders have really interesting stories why they are where they are today. And that has a lot of story to tell. Can come from like the sourcing materials. It can come from craftsmanship, like how is the product made? Because so many products have like
Mm-hmm.
such a process that when you buy it, you don't even know. Like if you don't read, or like the packaging is not done properly, there's so much potential that is missed because things are made very carefully and people compare things, based on just the name. And there's a lot of potential there to be used. And I think lastly is cultural significance. So there's products that for different cultures mean a lot. Like for example, for Argentina, mate, which is our, national tea, the things that people drink, or
Mm-hmm.
what like tea is for England or like India. I think like a lot of these products have a meaning that comes from like just tradition of people in general and not specifically from like that brand. So I think there's like many different points that you can have more than one. So many products have more than one, and all that can be expressed through packaging. And that's not only like an illustration, but that can be expressed through words in the packaging and like storytelling and like a
Mm-hmm.
narrative on like the website, marketing, etc.
Yeah, there's all those different facets that come into consideration, right? So, you made the example of tea is very different in Argentina, is very different in London, very different in India. Also colors, right? Like colors can mean totally different
Yeah,
things in different places. Copywriting, right? Words, phrases, sayings, those can mean very
symbols.
different things in
Yeah.
different places. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. And now you've built a team of contractors kind of all over and also have traveled a lot yourself and been that person that's been all over. What do you look for in a team member and how do you foster like the sense of creativity and the sense of like just curiosity in other cultures if that's not where you're from? What do you think?
That's a good question. I think, yeah,
Let's go
or
team members first. Let's talk about the team. Yeah.
okay. So what do I look for and what?
Team and
So
client.
mhm.
Yeah.
I think there's a few different values that I try to express to them in like our first call, and like the things that like I say right away. And like one of them is like openness, and openness to feedback and openness to say things. Because I feel like, yeah, like you said, our team is a little bit all over. Like I do have people from Argentina, like Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, and like everybody has so much to say. And like people sometimes working in a team feel like, oh, because she hired me, like I cannot say anything against her design. I'm like, no, please
Mhm.
tell me what you think, because everybody brings a very different perspective. And like I believe, yeah, traveling gives you that, by coming from a place and observing it from the outside also gives you a very valuable perspective on visuals, and like you said, colors, and what things mean, and like things that could be misleading or not interpreted the right way. And I feel for me that's a big thing that it's like not only say to people, but that's something you can sense, right? Like openness to communication. I think
Sure.
communication for me is big. And then curiosity. And that's something it's hard to know right away. I feel like that's something you learn by working with people a little bit and seeing like, things that how far they go on their own. Like, it's not only about doing just what I ask you, but like people that get farther and get really interested and like, there's other things that we can bring. And like, we love to work a lot with like collage style designs. And that helps us bring a lot of different
Mm-hmm.
pieces of art and texture and patterns of other cultures or the culture we're working with in the moment. And I think for me it's kind of that experimentation mindset of like, hey, like we can try this other thing that maybe me as a creative director I didn't think about, but if they are the designers, them bringing different ideas more than only what I say. So that's very important to me.
Yeah, the diversity of perspective and diversity of background and upbringing and culture to me has always been like a huge asset. I've always preached that on the podcast with my team, like with the people that I hire.
Mhm.
I'm always looking for like, okay, who can bring kind of a new flavor to this? Because the last thing that we want to be is all just like carbon copies of each other. I find that number one to just be kind of boring, and number two, like it's not really advantageous in business. It's way more advantageous to have a bunch of people from different places to do exactly what you talk about. Is like call out the things that might work or might not work or bring a different perspective to the table. You're also working with people from different countries. You speak multiple languages, correct? Which I'm so jealous. I'm so upset that my 4 years of high school Spanish and 3 years of college Italian Italian have served me zero because I don't speak either of them very well, besides just like basic vocab. But how do you feel like being like multicultural as a business owner is an advantage?
First of all, because my first language is Spanish, speaking English alone has opened so many doors for me. Like from day one that I started, like,
Mm-hmm.
as a freelancer, I always work with people like from the US and like, other countries, and English is just the international language. But having, I guess, a possibility, to speak to people in their language. So I speak like German, Spanish, English, a little bit of Portuguese, and now Italian. And it's just
Oh my
an extra
goodness.
flavor. And even if people, even if let's say I work with somebody from Germany and we'll still communicate in English, but them knowing that they can speak to me in German and like small things will make it more relatable. That for sure. And then
Mm-hmm.
this year I had a big, experience for myself where I was living in Mexico City and I started working or, getting meetings with people in Mexico in person, which already was super new for me because I've always done everything
Mm-hmm.
remote. And then in Spanish, that was a big challenge for me because I was very like used to doing, business conversations mainly in English. So it really took me a little bit out of my comfort
Mm-hmm.
zone, but it felt such a like sense of accomplishment because these people, sitting with having business conversations in different languages and being able to relate to them. Because I feel like in those situations, they would not have talked to me if I didn't speak Spanish. You know what I mean? So it's like
Sure,
opening
sure, sure.
doors to relate to more people and foster some relationships. But with that also comes, I feel like, challenges too.
Yeah, what would you say are some of the like experiences or differences between working for American clients, Latin American clients, European clients? Now you mentioned South Africa as well. Like are there character traits that you're like, wow, it's crazy that every American client I've ever had is like this, but in Latin America they're like that? Like what are some of those experiences?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I would say big realization is like, working culture is a thing. Like people have a lot of different
Sure.
dynamics when working, and like you have to be aware of that. Or like I guess you learn that and you see that, and it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes because for me, a
Right.
lot of my clients have been from America, and Americans tend to be very efficient, very fast. Like they take decisions very fast. They
Yeah.
also, and we had this conversation, like they appreciate and like know the value of design a little bit different than other countries. Like they know that design brings
Mm,
money, and other people think design is like a little bit more like a romantic thing. It's just the visuals, and they don't see the ROI on like investing, in design. So that's a bit of like, a curve of like teaching them what they're gonna get out of it. And to me, one of the funny,
mhm.
I guess, things is like, for example, in like Mexico and Latin America, people are very personal. They want to get to know you. Like it's not only work. Like, you're getting to know a person.
Mm,
They want to meet
mhm.
you, especially like now that I met people in person. Like I'm like, okay, I want to go straight to the point. And they're like, so what are you doing? What's your family doing? What, like they want to know everything about you. And like they
Right,
kind of, I learned like they need to
right.
know that about you to trust you. It's not only about like chit chat. It's more like, okay, if we want to work with you, we kind of want to know you as a person more. And then decision making. It's just like, in some countries, people have a really hard time saying no. Like they will,
Mm,
kind of like play around, like say, yeah, I love it. Like I do really like this. Let's work together. And then like never reply to you. And like they're not direct. They rather just like play it nice. And then I don't know, in your back, like they would never reply again. That's more comfortable to them, I guess. And other cultures like
right.
Germans, they don't care. Like they will tell you right away, like, I don't like this. This doesn't work for me. And it's very efficient because then you can respond and say like, okay, let's do it this other way. Like what way would actually work for you? So it's like adjusting those
Sure.
bits to fit, be proactive and things like knowing that they might not tell you.
Do you feel like this is experience that you've had from working with clients specifically or just be living in different locations? Because you also digital nomaded all around like I did for a long time. And I feel like when you're in different places, like I had this experience in Bali, for example. I noticed that when I was in Bali, there were a lot of people that like described themselves as entrepreneurs, but then like never worked. And it was really confusing to me because it was very like yeah, I own this business, I run this program, but then it was always talking about like the thing that they were launching that didn't have a lot of substance. And I think being
Mm-hmm.
from California, we have a lot of people like that too, so maybe that's the chip on my shoulder. But I'm wondering wondering versus, I think you're totally right. Like you get into Europe, you get into some of those countries and there is kind of more of an efficiency more towards the north. But then as soon as you get back towards like Italy or you get back towards the coast, it's like, oh, like it's like very chill and easy. So I'm wondering do you think that that's just like the culture informing the people, or do you think that the business in those countries has always been that way? What do you think?
I think that's culture in general. Like I feel like people are more
Yeah.
relaxed, and then they have the thing, it goes hand by hand. Like people work the way they live, and like that's the same way.
Yeah.
Like Americans are very efficient in so many ways, like outside of work as well. In their day to day life, it's like a very like fast paced life. I learned that I guess the hard way when I did an exchange year in the Philippines in 2016, and Filipinos are famous for that. They told me like Filipinos don't know how to say no. So every time
Mm,
they say yes, you
mm,
cannot try. Like they will tell you like, oh yeah, yeah, go do this, and then they will get mad. And then I was living in a host family, so I had to, always
funny.
be reading between the lines. Okay, what do they actually mean? Like they always say yes to things, and I think that is in a lot of cultures the case. Like people just have a different way of interacting. That's something I learned in South
Right.
America as well, maybe like Argentina. Like people sometimes they'll say things right away to you, and then they start accumulating resentment, and then it's kind of like behaving differently, and you have to understand like, is this person mad at me, or like is that something, whereas other
Yeah.
cultures will just tell you right
Yeah.
away.
Totally. It's a lot of kind of reading and communication skills that come into play. But it sounds like you like having the variety of having different clients from all over the world, right? Keeps
Yeah.
you on your toes.
Yeah, I think in
Yeah.
general, like I love
You like
culture
it.
and I love the challenge of it. And I think you
Uh-huh.
learn a lot about the people through work. It's like sometimes it's frustrating, but I think it's kind of like traveling. It's not always fun. Sometimes you're like, what am I even doing here?
Right.
But it's part of the experience.
Which kind of leads to the next question. How do you plan to market yourself in all of these different markets? How are people finding their way to you?
So now I'm focusing more. I think that's a big question because I was always, like, yeah, now I do only packaging,
Yeah.
but it's still a big world. Like I said, it's still like so many, the cosmetics, foods.
Mm,
And that's why I am leaning now towards this like cultural brands. And I'm trying to, make a lot of, because the thing is, it's a pretty big market. Like there's so many brands that are, have a rich
mhm.
cultural background from, a lot of brands in the US from, immigrants, a lot of immigrants that want to bring, part of their culture in the US, or brands in other countries that want to bring, other cultures or their own. And I feel like I'm seeing more and more, like as I'm doing more research, there is so, especially like, let's say in soft drinks, like so many brands on their website have
Mm,
beautiful stories, but then you see their packaging and you can't even tell them apart. Like they all look so similar because they start following
mhm,
trends. And I'm
mhm.
trying on platforms like LinkedIn, I'm trying to inform, founders. I'm connecting with a lot of founders in the CPG industry and starting to make more and more content to educate people on like what they could do for their brand that would actually benefit them. And like they know, and founders know how special their product is, but oftentimes they just don't know how to showcase
Right.
that. And then that's when I feel like a little bit of what I'm doing is educating people on like, okay, this is very unique about your culture, or like sharing my experience of things that I notice in different cultures
Yes.
that could be used. Let's say, oh, I go to Korea and I see that a lot of brands do this. So if you have a Korean brand in the US, you might want to consider adding all these pieces of beautiful culture that comes from that country. And I think that's part of my marketing strategy right now.
Well, and it's one of those things that I think we talk about a lot on the podcast, which is because of the internet and because how much people do value travel, there was this trend towards making everything super clean, super minimal, and like
Mhm.
stripping away anything that could be distracting, or it just going for a really bold type, really bold color, which works in some cases. But I think what we lack in that is that you don't have a way to differentiate like similar products from each other, right? So
Mhm.
if you're going to like your nice bougie grocery store, which is one of my favorite places in the whole world, it's like a specialty food store, and you're looking at items, like you're banking on that consumer having to make a choice based on packaging alone, right? Like you can't stand in the middle of the aisle and open the thing and taste test it. So how are you going to capture what the contents are and capture their attention and create some kind of connection to the story, right? So
Mhm.
for me, like I think about being an Amsterdam and eating stroopwafels. And then when I see stroopwafels marketed as stroopwafels in the grocery store, I'm so happy. Instead of them calling them like caramel flat cookie waffle, which is what it is. But you want it to have that connection, right? Like you want
Yeah.
it to have a story, or like speculoos being like cookie butter. That was such a phase. Like that was such a moment because people are like, what the heck is this? And it creates like that curiosity. And I think there's so much culture to be had in food, and there's so much culture to be had in beverage, like you said,
Yeah.
and kind of calling out the attention. But to your point, I think so many brands followed trends that they lost the opportunity to like create long lasting meaning. And that long lasting meaning is going to come from your connection to culture in a lot of ways. And how
Yeah.
do you pull that culture forward, and how do you make it so that when somebody sees your thing, they go, yep, that's for me. I think some of the pushback that I get from clients, I'm curious if this happens to you too, is that they get really afraid to do anything that's going to like piss someone off or like repel them, right? They're trying to cast the widest net and like capture as many customers as possible, where sometimes you kind of need to be able to be like, if you like us, come on over. But if you don't like us, that's okay too. Do you find that
Yeah.
that happens? Like, do you have clients that go like, well, what if so-and-so, like my ideal client is everyone. And if we go with your idea, Palu, then how do we know that so-and-so is going to buy this thing? And what
Yeah,
do you
I
say to
think
them?
I think that's a big thing, and also people just wanting to lean towards what everybody's doing, and that's why like a little bit I'm always trying to
Yeah.
like get away from that, because it's like, yeah, because everybody's doing it doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. And this is my thing about like so many brands looking the same. I try to tell them like there is, a different way to do things, and there was always someone who did it for the first time and worked for them, and then
Mm-hmm.
everybody started kind of
Mm-hmm.
replicating that. I think I'm trying to get away from that minimalism. I say I'm a maximalist. Like I just want to add a lot of things and like
Right.
make your product very special, and that scares people because it's like not only some people when it comes to culture they are afraid of like offending that culture of like misusing elements or
Right.
like is this and I'm doing research and there's actually brands doing that, like they're not really using a lot of elements the right way or like for not the right culture or things that you're like I don't know about this. But founders do have that fear of like, which is normal, like we all do, like what are people gonna say if like
Mm-hmm.
something is not exactly like what everybody expects. And I think that's the idea. It's like do something that people don't expect and connect with them, and not only resonate with the people who know the product and know the culture, but also create curiosity for those who don't, like what is this product, and like I've never heard of
Well,
this.
and be ready. Yeah, be ready to create some haters. That's part of the thing, right? Like if your whole deal is that you make chips that are flavored like certain dishes from your childhood, like don't strip that away from the offering. Like realize like that may not fit for some people, but for the people that it does fit for, they're like,
Yeah.
"Oh my gosh, this is perfect. This tastes exactly like the way my grandma used to make it," or whatever, right? Like you'll get that person, but it's goes back to our conversation about niche, right? It's like there's this fear that like, oh, if I cut down on the number of people I'm trying to reach, then I'm not going to make as much money. I'm not going to have as much business. I'm not going to have as much success. When like really the opposite is true. It's like the more you can be specialized in the one thing you do really, 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 really
Yeah.
well, you get all these other opportunities and all these other doors that open because then that's the thing you're known for. That's the thing
Yeah.
that's different about you. And that's the thing that people remember, so that when you have your like chips that are inspired by the dish from your family, and then the ice cream company reaches out to you and wants to do a collab, you have a really unique, cool collab
Yeah.
that otherwise you wouldn't have had if you decided to strip all that stuff away and just be regular flavored.
Yeah, and I think also now we're living in a very interesting world where cultures are mixing, and you get so many people. Like I
Mm-hmm.
met people that are like, yeah, I'm like a quarter Spanish, a quarter Mexican. I'm like even myself as an Argentinian, it's like a mix of like bloods and cultures, and part Italian, part my grandma is like Welsh. So it's like there's all these cultures,
Yeah.
and I'm seeing some brands starting to do that. Like I saw this brand the other day where they're mixing Italian tomato sauce with gochujang, which is a Korean hot
Cool.
sauce, and
Yeah.
they're called something like not your typical grandma sauce, something like that. And they're mixing,
Love it.
and yeah, and like they're going full on this like offending, kind of like offending people, and like yeah, we're doing this weird mix because we love it. And people now are growing up in families that are very mixed. And like they grow up with like one parent bringing this part of culture and the other bringing this. And I think, in a few years, we're going to start seeing more and more of these brands that are just like a mix of cultures. And I'm really interested to see how those
Right.
things are going to start to play out visually.
How do you approach the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation? Do you ever have these conversations with your clients? Like, how can we celebrate a culture that's not ours without borrowing so much from it or making it to the point where it's like, ooh, that's not okay. What do you think?
I think that to not get to the point where it's like, appropriation is more like research. Like you need to,
Mhm.
not
Yeah.
just put out a product and like not test it. And like, you need to make sure you do enough research, maybe like even hire someone from that place to give you the right information. And that's what I also find valuable of working with people from international backgrounds. Sometimes I get to hire, if I'm working with a brand from Italy, I'll sometimes hire a designer that's from Italy because they might also bring a really great,
Yeah.
perspective on it. And I think that, yeah, that a lot of the brands that work with cultural products, they are usually the founders are the ones that come from that culture. So they don't have that fear as much because they know it all, or they feel like they know it all. So they know, they know what they're talking
Right, right.
about. And I think this might come more with like people that like maybe this brand that they're taking two different cultures and maybe it's not their own. And I think a way to make sure you're doing it right is through research and testing and asking people
Yeah.
and just making sure that you can use all the, you can use the things that are valuable to them, their phrases, their colors, their patterns, but just make sure you're using them the right way and you're not, misusing their elements for the sake of making money.
Yeah, I think the most famous example of that is when Kim Kardashian tried to launch like kimono, right?
Mm,
So before it was Skims, it was called kimono, and it
yeah.
got such crazy backlash, which it deserved because you can't call your like shapewear intimates brand after something that's like a culturally, historically, super like ceremoniously
Hmm.
well regarded like garment in another culture. It just was like such a misstep. But I think to your point, also, as people become more multicultural and like more cultures mishmash with each other, I love a fusion. Like, I love a
Mhm.
fusion restaurant. I love a fusion
Yeah,
brand.
same.
I love a fusion product. And I think there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of fun to be had in that, so long as like you're approaching it with respect, you've done your research, you're not misusing or misappropriating any kind of elements that shouldn't be in the mix. But if it's coming from the founder story already, you got a good head start on it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And that happens a
Wonderful.
lot. I love with like tequila and mezcal brands. Those are like my passion projects because
Mhm.
in Mexico, there's such a big culture around tequila and mezcal. It's almost like a ritual,
Mhm.
And I think founders that are, and it's becoming so international that I think that's going to be something people have to be aware of, like founders, because I work with somebody that, exports, it works with producers and then they export to
Sure.
people mostly in the US that just want to have their own brand. And these people like make sure, okay, that the culture is like, the culture of the producers also is like expressed in the right way and they are supported and that they get paid fairly. And
Right.
this whole thing to me is
Right.
so interesting to get into work with the people that like, are on the fields because they have so much to say and they have like their own stories and that is so rich.
I mean, that brings us back to the pricing conversation, right? Like you had brought up to me, like people in Argentina don't pay the prices that Americans pay, right? Or people in other countries don't see the value, like you said before, of like they don't understand the value of design as like giving you ROI. How do
Mhm.
you justify, or where do you think that comes from? Like this discrepancy in pricing, and where do you feel like, do you think it's changing? I guess is my bigger question. Is like, do you think as the world becomes even more online and more global, do you think all of that will kind of level off, or do you think there's still going to be this disparity between like Western countries and Latin American countries, Eastern countries, etc.?
I think there's different factors to it. One thing that it's hopefully going to change, but I don't think it's going to change in the near future is just economical stability, right? And like the way countries
True,
are,
of course.
a lot of countries in South America and just going through a big crisis where they're like, I can't invest in design. Like I'm just trying to get my business off the ground. And like there's so many other things and they just don't have the budget for it. And for those cases, of course, if you really want to work in this project, you do have to budget that because you know that the situation is just completely different. But then there's, I think, countries where maybe the economical situation is very similar. But I think it's more like a culture thing. Like they just don't have the
Yeah.
mindset that like design is what it is, and they see it more as like, aesthetics. And I think that varies people person to person. I don't want to generalize like one country or the other, but I feel like Americans might be more
For
in
sure.
tune with a lot of like
Right.
all the points that can make you more money. Okay, let's go all in on that. And they know design is one of them.
But then on the flip side of that, we've completely lost like any artisans in this country. You know what I mean? Like everyone that was creative that used to make like
Mm.
cabinetry and flooring and tile and all these things all became marketers, and then we all like are selling our design services because nobody makes things with their hands anymore. But
That
that's a
might
whole
be where
other
the world is
sidebar.
going. Like, some countries will take care of the production and craftsmanship.
True.
Some countries will be selling it, which might not be the most fair
But
deal.
this is
But
why but maybe this is why we pay a premium for craft, right? Like if you
yeah,
do travel and you bring home some kind of souvenir for your house, it's almost never minimalist. It's
yeah,
like always has like ornate carvings or detail or inlay or hand drawn,
yeah,
handmade, blah, blah, blah. Because in the States, that's now rare, right?
yeah,
Or to get it done to get it done affordably means to do it in mass scale. And then it's not really special because it's like, okay, there's 5,000 of these for sale at Home Goods. Like, I don't know it's really all that special anymore. So it's interesting. I think things will like change and morph as well, but all the more reason that being a packaging designer, I think you're right. It kind of hits at that perfect spot between the online experience and the in-person physical experience. And so thank you so much for sharing all your insights about packaging and culture informed design. Where can everyone find you, follow you, or even work with you?
Thank you. So everyone can find me on Instagram as Palu Malerba. You probably will see in the episode if you can spell it. And
Uh-huh.
my agency's website and Instagram are both CreativeWise.co.
Perfect. Yes, we'll definitely link it in the show notes. If you guys enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to share, throw Palu a follow, CreativeWise a follow, and thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next time. Thanks, Palu.
Thank you so much.
See ya.